Because I see that.
Okay, everybody. So, it's time to start the seminar. Thank you very much for coming. The seminar is going to be organized by GSS program and the Global Health Interdisciplinary Unit. We think it's more than pleasure to be able to give you very unusual guest to the seminar. Professor Piot, he is the director of the prestigious London School of Hygiene and Medicine. Also, I will introduce in more detail by Professor Martin, so in the field of epidemic, he doesn't know and also in the field of global health, he is the most prominent person that can very serious part in the global health. So today he is coming to meet his wife, Maggie Wilson. She's a professor also of the London School of Health and Medicine, specialized in the infectious disease epidemiology. In infectious disease, especially, more in the vaccination program. So we're very much happy to both in Tokyo today. He kindly visited us on the way from Nagasaki to Tokyo. So just to have a lecture to the students. So as I said, what will be more introduction? I just wanted to introduce his personal. So he's a very great person, but then also his person. So looking forward to he very love Japan. So he very much like Japanese people. So yesterday I found that he can even tell the difference between the leaves, the one chocolate, what is sencha. So, special taste. Also, he the cooking. So every time he comes to Japan, at Kyoto, he buys them hocho, knife. It's definitely nice. Not to kill the person. I hope it. So now I was mental to introduce you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today for this colorful seminar of Piot University Global Health Interdisciplinary Units. So today our honored guest is Dr. Piot, that I'm sure everybody knows, but I will give a short introduction here. Professor Piot is a well-known international scholar whose leadership and scientific production has resonated strongly in the global health area. He is currently the director of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and a professor of global health. He was the founding executive director of the United Nation Program on HIV/AIDS from 1995 to 2008, and under his leadership, the UNAIDS became one of the leading organizations in the fight against HIV/AIDS. For many of us, we also know him as one of the scholars who co-discovered the Ebola virus in the Democratic Republic of Congo, then Zaire. That was 1976, while he was working for the Institute of Medicine on trial in Belgium. His scientific production is really outstanding, with over 580 scientific articles and around 17 books to his credits. And one of his latest books is called No Time to Lose, A Life in Pursuit of Deadly Disease. This is a very inspiring book, elegantly describing his area in global health. He's also a recipient of numerous prestigious awards, reflecting his great contribution to the fight against global AIDS and epidemic of Ebola. You can cite, for example, the Gideon Bucci Africa Prize for Medical Research, the Prince Mahidon Award for Public Health, Robert Koch Global Gold Medal, the Nelson Mandela Award for Health and Human Rights, just to name a few. So we are very, very honored to have Professor Piot today, and it's an honor for us to have such an outstanding guest begin our awards. Please join me for invite Professor Piot.
I like to move around. So, thank you very much, Batu, and good afternoon, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be back in Kyoto, and not only for the culinary aspects, which of course I appreciate very much, but also this is one of the great universities in the world, and as you probably know, but I think that's not only what you think about yourself, but it's also what other people outside Japan think. And so I'm very pleased that we are developing and growing a collaboration in different fields. With the Department of Seroepidemiology, we've had some collaboration for years, but also in other fields. I heard just in clinical trial statistics, but I think there may be a number of areas where we can collaborate with, because at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, we are, it's a bit special in the sense that in the UK you have independent graduate schools, like the London School of Economics, you have Royal Veterinary College, you have the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and in the past, medical schools, they were standalone. I'm not sure it's the best idea, but that's the way it is. And so we are quite integrated from very basic medical science or molecular biology, but also quite basic statistics. We employ as mathematicians as well as clinicians, as well as epidemiologists. My wife is actually an anthropologist. Because we believe that in order to improve health, you need expertise and the disciplines from a very wide spectrum. Because often in the medical community, we tend to think, okay, we will fix this problem with some pills. And that is true for many things, but not for everything. So what I will tell you a bit about is what the Batu referred to, that you can read in my book, No Time to Lose. This is an advertisement now. This is because it came out also in Japanese. I think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and soon also in Chinese, because I heard in Mandarin or so. But it is really how did I get involved in, let's call it global health, public health, and infectious diseases, and what are the big issues that we have to deal with. Now, when I was in the last year in medical school, I went to talk to my professors to see what to do with specialty training, and this was in 1974, so I'm an old man. In this university, I think I would have been put on compulsory retirement at 65. In the UK, this is no longer the case. It's considered a discrimination on the basis of age. So if you're productive, you can stay. If you're not productive, you're out. So that's the principle. But my professor said, no future in infectious diseases, because I told them I'm interested in microbes, in epidemics, and so I'm fascinated by it already when I was a child. But they say, we have vaccines, we have antibiotics, we have hygiene. Those a smart boy like you should not do this. But you know, I feel strongly that you need to follow your passion when you choose a career and a job, because that you will do well. If you do something only because you think this is where the market is going to offer you a job, as often is the case now that they come, so I don't know about Japan, but in London that's what they tell people. I think you may be so disappointed and bored, have a bored life and boring life. And also I'm slightly stubborn, so I said I'm going to go infectious diseases. And that's what I did, my PhD in microbiology and so on. And then 2 years later, my life changed because there was a thermos. I know it was made in China, but it was not this one. This comes from Google Images. But it's a thermos like this arrived at the reception of the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Antwerp, where I was then in training in virology, so to learn how to isolate viruses and so on. And a pilot from an airline that no longer exists, Sabina, brought this thermos which contained 2 vials with blood straight from Kinshasa and dropped it at the reception. And like this. And it contained also a note from the physician and said that this is blood from a Catholic missionary, a Catholic nun, who had died with some mysterious disease. And the clinical diagnosis was yellow fever, question mark. Now, yellow fever is not a problem. We were laboratory certified for arboviruses. These are viruses that are transmitted by insects. So no problem, and we did all the normal procedures of virology, which is a bit artisanal, but certainly in these days, no PCR, no molecular diagnostics and so on. And out of this, we isolated the virus, which is going to become Ebola virus, known as Ebola virus. And so we saw under the electron microscope this figure, and for those of you who have seen viruses are usually round spheres or square, but not like this, looks more like spaghetti or soba, whatever, you know. And but then we got the news that there was a very dangerous, high mortality epidemic going on in the country of origin of Batu in Congo, in Zaire, and that we should stop all investigations because our laboratory was not equipped for this. We could work in, for those who know the laboratory, we were like BSL 2.5 maybe. So 3 is TB, 4 is what they are now going to build in Nagasaki for a national laboratory for where you can work with Ebola and all that. So we had to stop all research, which we did, and we packed it and we sent the specimen, the isolate, to the US, to the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, where they had a highly safe, specialized laboratory. And there it could then confirm that this was a new virus, and that virus was then called Ebola because viruses need a name, just like people need a name that we can refer to them. And in the old days, the virus was often named after the person who discovered it, but that's not considered bad taste. And also, often today, it's a collective effort, like in our case, several groups. And then sometimes it's called after the name of the place where an epidemic is, or it was isolated. But in the case of such a dangerous virus, that's not so good. You could stigmatize everybody. We've known that with Lassa. This is a virus that was discovered in Nigeria. And people from Lassa are very unhappy. Because when you say, hi, I'm from Lassa, then everybody goes. So we said we're going to name it after a close river. And this is a river, it's one of a rare image in the northern part of Congo. And this is a better microscope, electron microscopic figure. So this is the Ebola river, a beautiful name, but a very risky virus. And the epicenter, the epidemic was happening in a place called Yambuco. Here is a mission hospital and a school, a cooperative or agriculture cooperative. So the classic type of combination in the old colonial days. And there were about already 200 deaths, including 5 missionaries. And this was in 1976. And I was then a part of a team that consisted of Congolese physicians led by Professor Muyembe, who was a professor of microbiology in Kinshasa, and then particularly more experienced colleagues from one from US CDC, one from Institut Pasteur, and I had zero experience. I had never been to Africa and I had never investigated an epidemic. So normally I would not qualify to go there, but there were no other volunteers, so that was my luck. I considered. And we were, this is how we were protected with just a paper gown, latex gloves, just paper mask that you use here when you are cold, and the motorbike goggles that I had found somewhere. This is not, I took the picture, this is called PSO. Today, in the last epidemic in West Africa, this is the kind of protective gear which is much better. Now, we had as mission one, to stop the epidemic. Okay, but the problem is you can only fight an epidemic or a contagious disease when you know how this virus, in this case, is transmitted. Is it mosquitoes? Is it water? Is it food? Is it sex? Is it blood? Is it close contact? I mean, the classic ways that microbes are transmitted, and we didn't know. So our priority was really to try to find out how is this transmitted, while we would put entire villages in quarantine and isolate patients. And I think it was a wise decision not to bring them to the hospital, because today we know that hospitals are amplifiers of viruses. You bring people together and you make it actually worse, and in any case there was nothing we could do for these poor people. 90% of people died from Ebola in these days. So what you then do when you see an epidemic is you try to define it in three terms: time, place, person. You've done that, I see. This is what we did. This we did before there were mobile phones, laptops, and so on. We had calculators, that's about it. And so you draw an epidemic curve. This is the days, this is September, October, and this is the number of cases, the onset. So how did we collect that? We went into villages and we collected, we talked to people. And we looked at the hospital records, but they were incomplete. And we arrived about here. So this is the best time for epidemiologists to arrive, because people will think that it's thanks to you that it's going to end. But when you arrive here and it goes up and up and up, then you will be fired and another team will come. It's like when you have some bottle of something that is very hard to open. And you try and then you give it to someone else, and then that person can do it. Because you hold on the bottle. So what you see in this curve is that it peaked, it went up and up and up, and there's a peak, and then it came down. And then you find, okay, but what happened around that time? Why would that be the case? And so what happened is that around here, the hospital was basically closed for two reasons. One, 11 out of 17 hospital staff at all were sick or had died. So massive mortality among the nurses and one medical assistant. And two, people thought there's something wrong with that hospital. People are not stupid. There's a kind of like people science. They made this conclusion themselves. That was the first indication of something wrong at the hospital. Secondly, when we mapped it out. Geography is important in epidemiology and public health, geospatial arrangements, and mobility and so on. And we saw that the closer someone lives near the hospital, the higher the risk of getting Ebola. And then thirdly, always most important, is who are the people. And there we found that high mortality among hospital staff. So something again going on. Secondly, people who care for someone in the family with Ebola, also high mortality. Thirdly, people who attended funeral of someone with Ebola, very high mortality. Now, and during the funeral rites, the funeral rites in every society are there to say farewell to loved ones. And there are many ways of doing that. I don't know about Japan at all, but in Europe we have lost, you don't want to deal with it, and some professional deals with it, and in culture there, it is really the whole family and the friends and all that, they come and say farewell, and you touch the body and so on, which normally is okay. However, in the case of Ebola, we know today, when you die, you're covered with blood, vomitus, diarrhea, and in other words, full of virus. So these were all indicators that something, again, was wrong. And when we put it all together, and then another thing that was an observation that would be interesting for you in terms of thinking. So you break it, the number of the people down by age and sex, as they say. Again, number of cases, and here you see age group, and then in blue males, in red females. And one thing is striking, that is that when you draw that there are twice as many women as men. Now, the most important thing in epidemiology is the denominator, because it could be that in this society that the men are away, that they're working in the town or in the plantations or what have you. So that this is a normal reflection, as we see in many societies. Rural areas often fewer men than women. In the cities, more men than women. But we looked at that, that was not the case. And then the question is, what is the difference between a man and a woman between 15 and 29 years old? No, we were a group of men, and so it took us a few hours to discover that women can become pregnant. And that was you have to formulate a hypothesis. The isolation of the virus to us was luck, we did our job. And in an epidemiological investigation, that becomes science, because you have a hypothesis. You have to, and the hypothesis was that, okay, there's a difference here that's relevant for the virus transmission. And then what we found indeed is that the excess of women were either women who had just given birth or pregnant women. Then the question is, what is going on? What happened with these pregnant women? And then we found that they would come all to the hospital for antenatal care. And the question is, what is going on in that hospital? What is going on and what is wrong? And that took, all this we found in 48 hours. Just by talking to people and by plotting it out, but in these days it was all by hand. When I remember 2 years ago, some mathematical models at our school asked for my old notes, and I gave them, and then they asked, where's the spreadsheet? And I said, this is the spreadsheet. It's just like, I had a drawing, and this is what we had, and then we put it all together, but then it took a while to find out. So, and what we found is that at this antenatal clinic, in the morning, Mother Superior of the nuns would distribute 5 needles and 5 syringes, and to the outpatient department, every woman would get an injection. This is the best way of transmitting a virus. This is why we have hepatitis C epidemics in many of the countries in Asia and in the Middle East, and etc. So it all came together in the hospital, and at the end of the day, what we found was that you need really close contact, caring for somebody with Ebola in the hospital, at home, or what happened, what they found in West Africa is sitting together in a taxi with someone who's already dying. When someone is just infected, there's no problem. It is only when they become really symptomatic. During funeral, what we did not know then was that sex is also a mode of transmission. Now, since I've been working on sexual transmitted infections, my most of my life, I think that nearly all infections can become sexually transmitted, which we found. Then the question is, what is the what happened? Where is this coming from? And there were many hypotheses, and people say it's coming from monkeys. And this is from the market in there. This is a dried smoked monkey, and so on. But today, people do eat. Every society eats the proteins that are around. You know, in Europe we eat deer, we eat all kinds of wild animals, but there are no monkeys, so we don't eat them. And I'll come back to that. Now, just since many of you are studying, so one slide with very simple mathematics. This is from a really very fundamental formula for understanding the spread of infectious pathogens at the population level. I mean, the reality is, of course, a bit more complicated, but it comes down to the same thing. And that is that the reproductive rate, which is, if it is 1, it means that on the average, if I'm infected, on the average, I will infect one other person. If the reproductive rate is more than 1, it means on the average, I infect more than one person. And you see a growing number of cases. If it's less than 1, it will die out. So, and that's in function of the probability of transmission, beta. C is the number of contacts, and D the duration of infectiousness. And just a few words on this. Probability of transmission in terms of Ebola is very low, because you need, at population level, you need very close contact. Very few people have that close contact, only if you care for someone. Number of contacts is also very limited, because someone is very sick. Except what we saw in West Africa is that when a very famous or popular person dies, many people come to the funeral. And then you can have many infections, contacts. Duration of infectiousness, Ebola, is very short. 1 week after infection, you become ill. 1 week later, you're dead. Very different from HIV, where you can be, infectious for 10 years and have many contacts. So when you put that all together, you can say Ebola is not going to be a problem. And that has been the case for many years. Because for between 1976 and 2014, all known outbreaks of Ebola and the related virus Marburg were all in Central Africa. So we always thought this is a Central African problem, and that's it. And never really killed more than 300 people, 400. I mean, that's very bad in your community, but it never really became a big crisis. Until in 2014, there was this outbreak in West Africa, the biggest ever. And it's interesting to see that the first case was a young boy in the place called Gekedu in Guinea, who died on the 23rd of December, 2013. And this is a town that's near the border with Liberia and Sierra Leone, but it's the same people. Just the countries, the maps have been made in colonial times. So there's nothing to do with the natural type of Ebola. And then it took, the number of cases increased, and it took until the 13th of March, three months before the diagnosis of Ebola was made. And that's for 2 reasons. One is that these are countries that come out of very bad civil war and very corrupt dictatorship. And so the health system is gone, professions left the country, emigrated, and so on. And secondly, nobody was looking for Ebola in West Africa, because we say this is a Central African problem, and you can only find what you're looking for. So the diagnosis was made and then not much happened. And it's until August, so 5 months later, that WHO declared this a public health emergency, and wasted a lot of time and did not do a good job, to be honest. And so it became the largest epidemic ever, with 11,000 deaths, including 500 healthcare workers. nurses, doctors, and then in countries that have already a problem with healthcare doctors. First hypothesis was this is a new virus. Now today, thanks to molecular diagnostic techniques, we can very rapidly know whether some virus is the same or is different. And I'm not going to go into details, but suffice it to say that the viruses from West Africa are all of the same type as was found in Zaire and in Gabon, also in Central Africa. So it's the type Zaire. So it was not a virus. What was it then? And what I called in an editorial in Science, in the weekly scientific journal, I called it a perfect storm. What is a perfect storm? When you have, it's like vectors coming together. That they're all contributing, and if they're all coming together, you're in bad news. That's how you have a tsunami. It's also when you have several different elements coming into the same direction, and you have a big event, a big storm. And so that, and what are these vectors? One, what I mentioned, I think is most important, is the disruption in society because of civil war in Sierra Leone and Liberia. The two countries were on the way up, reconstruction and so on, but still a lot of distrust vis-a-vis the government. When in a country people kill each other because they're on different sides, it takes a generation to come back. But also, professions have left the country. There's no infrastructure. So, and when you look at that, you know. Okay. There was sorry. But we were like in Liberia, there's one doctor for about 100,000 people. And one nurse for about 30,000 people. So one midwife for also about 100,000. So 50,000 people. So that means that you could not help. And the governments also reacted very slowly. That I can understand because they were never confronted with this kind of epidemic. But the international community also, WHO, did not do a job. It was only MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, that was really active in the field, but they are also are limited in what they can do. So it was this perfect storm, and it shows that what is normally a fairly small problem, and in the like in DRC Congo, they know how to handle that. It's just quite limited. Here, entire cities became infected and so on, and you can see that this is an MSF Ebola treatment unit. These are very complicated things because you have to protect the patients, the population, and also the healthcare workers at high cost. It led to big societal disruption. The hospitals were closed because the doctors, nurses were dying and nobody wanted to work there. The schools were closed, the university was closed for 2 years. No commerce, the farmers could not sell their produce and so on. And people were put in quarantine and there were major incidents, the army had to intervene. So it shows how an epidemic can completely disrupt a society. And here it shows also that it's not only the Ebola that killed, but also that you see the number of doctors, nurses and midwives went down 7 to 8% because they died from Ebola. It's quite so serious. Maternal mortality went up in Liberia, doubled during the epidemic because women could not go to the hospital to be delivered. And so when you think of epidemics, think more not just about the people who have it, but also beyond that. For the first time ever, also there were cases outside these countries. I mean, there were in the neighboring countries, in Senegal and Mali, and then also Nigeria, but then also in the US, in Spain, in the UK. Cases. So for the first time, there were this export of cases. Now, on the positive side, for the first time ever, there was also a some good, solid research was conducted. And that was, when you work in the lab, you can do that with one hand. We were able to evaluate a vaccine and show that it can work. We continue work on vaccines with another vaccine. This is a vaccine from Merck, and then we work also with the vaccine Johnson & Johnson. There was research on some therapy, but none of that worked. But anyway, for the first time there was some progress. And Japan was quite active. There were many volunteers, mostly through MSF, some through WHO and the Red Cross. It donated money to WHO for this, and was very active still in the development in several aspects, because global health has become quite a priority for the Japanese government. So the World Bank has established a financing facility, a fund, so that poor countries can draw on that fund. We have developed a mechanism to develop vaccines where this market failure. So with an Ebola vaccine, no company is going to make money. So you need to have the know-how of the company and some public money. And the Nagasaki BSL-4 laboratory was already planned before, but vaguely. But then that gave a real, stimulus to do it. Today there is another epidemic of Ebola. Ebola will always come back because there's a reservoir. And again, in the northern part of Congo. So this is about the area where the first epidemic was, where I worked. So a very isolated region, and so, but it seems they're quite under control, I must say, at the moment. And ironically, when an area is very hard to reach, that protects actually the rest, because it means not only hard to get to, but also for people hard to get out. And so that's what is happening. Now, epidemics will always be with us and have been part of the human condition. Just look at the history of Kyoto, the epidemics that have changed sometimes the politics of Kyoto. I'm just reading the history, and it's quite fascinating. So, in the future, we'll see. But in the last 100 years, the biggest epidemic was the Spanish flu. So the influenza vaccine caused about 50 million deaths, more than World War I. And this was at a time when there were basically no air travel. Europe was destroyed and had so many victims, you could hardly travel. Today, a virus, an influenza virus, is completely different, will create far more havoc, I think. And then what probably will become the biggest epidemic of all is HIV, because up to now about 35 million people have died, and every year another million. So, and the end is not in sight. So we're in 15 years there will be as many that died from HIV. And then there are epidemics of all kinds, and I'll come back to that. Now, just I'd like to discuss one, because it illustrates how in today's globalized world, nothing is really local. MERS stands for Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. It's a new virus, which is a coronavirus related like SARS, which came up in Hong Kong and China, and it is infecting people who have camels in the Gulf area particularly. And one day, a Korean businessman left from the Gulf and flew to Seoul, and it really gave rise to an epidemic in Korea, here in a big way. And so this was 2 years ago, 2015, and Korea is very close to here, as you very well know. This is, it's not really Nagasaki is here, but these islands that are there. There were cases in different hospitals, and about 50 people died. So you could say, why should I care about an epidemic in the Middle East or in Africa? Well, because this is what can happen. And it is amplified when someone is admitted to a hospital. So that's one aspect. And then we have the case of HIV, where an epidemic is becoming endemic. Endemic means that you have continuing transmission. So for HIV, it went up and up and up, and then the end of the last century started to come down. And now there are about, every year, 2 million new infections. And it's going up in some of like here in Japan, it's only up in specific populations, but it is not going down. And so I don't believe the propaganda that says that the end of the AIDS by 2030. I don't think that will happen unless we have a vaccine. And just look here, this is the area in the world where there's the highest incidence, new infections of HIV in the world. This is in rural South Africa, this is in KwaZulu-Natal, it's near the border with Swaziland and Mozambique. And from one study by Slima Bukarin, and in that community, this is probably the highest ever documented. When you're a young woman, your risk for becoming HIV positive is enormous. It's enormous in that community, 9%, mostly it's like 3%. But when you think this is it starts at 18, that means by 30, 35, 40% are HIV positive. So that continues today. So that's no longer an explosive epidemic in most societies, but it's just high transmission in many communities. So what do all these have in common is actually at the so-called zoonosis. We had a discussion when I met the students and someone up there, the veterinarian, yes. Well, they said, of One Health. I like very much that concept because when we think of human infectious diseases, particularly epidemics, they are originating in animals. Chimpanzees with HIV comes from chimpanzees, we know that. Bats, this is for Ebola or coronaviruses. And then influenza, as the various types have a broad spectrum of animals as their host. So we need to work with our veterinary colleagues, and we need to know what's going on there in order for protecting us, human animals, human primates, and also the others. And even if in today's world infectious diseases are going down and down and down, that's thanks to really lots of effort. So that's quite an achievement. Except for sub-Saharan Africa, where the majority of deaths are still due to infectious diseases. In the rest of the world, it's chronic diseases. It's diabetes, it's cardiovascular disease, and so on, and I'll come back to that. But these zoonotic diseases and emerging infections will always continue because there is this animal reservoir. And there are many drivers of it. I won't go and discuss them because that could be in itself a presentation. But mobility, of course, is much, much bigger than ever. So that means that a local problem is no longer a local problem, can be a big problem. It's the intensity of agricultural practices, but also food production. In the time when you eat a chicken from a farmer who has a few chickens in his backyard, it's bad when there's a small epidemic, bad for the farmer, bad for the chickens. But when you have 1 million chickens, this is the case now in these farms, that amplifies and they're exported to other countries and so on. So the environmental pollution, human demographic pressure, climate change, and so on. Now, after the Ebola outbreak, there were several panels. I chaired one review panel with Harvard University and London School of Hygiene Tropical Medicine, where we tried to say, okay, at least we can do is to take measures that if this big epidemic can no longer occur. You cannot prevent outbreaks, that that something starts, that someone becomes infected, so that you can prevent that they become big epidemics. That is what our job is. And and all the panels came up with something similar. So we need epidemic preparedness. So we need public health systems, One Health, laboratory, surveillance, and all that, the kind of things that you are learning about. WHO did not do a good job, so it needs to be reformed. That's maybe the most difficult of all the recommendations. But there's now new director general is elected. We'll see. Dr. Tedros from Ethiopia, first time Africa. And he's an alumnus from our school. We're very proud. The last three candidates, two were alumni from our school. Statistically, we were in good position. We also need to listen to people and engage with the communities, with NGOs. It's not just government, private sector. One problem that was happened during the West Africa Ebola epidemic is that data were not shared. Samples were not shared because I want to make an application and I don't want to share my data, which was really unethical. Particularly in times of epidemics, it's very important to have online, real-time information, and that there is now some agreement, and many people have signed that now no longer doing that. And then, what I call here R&D systems, we need new R&D systems when there is no market incentive. What do I mean by that? Vaccine against Ebola, as I mentioned, nobody's going to make money with that. Or against Lassa or some of these. So we need a new system. And that is something I worked on for more than a year with some other people. And we founded Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness in Age 7. Japan is one of the first donors. Germany, Norway, and Japan are the strongest supporters. And it brings together pharmaceutical companies that produce vaccines and biotech. And India also. India for the first time, big supporter. And the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and bringing money together, and then a coordinated research agenda, and the priorities besides finishing the job on Ebola is Lassa, vaccines against Lassa fever, MERS, and Nipah is a virus that is found in Southeast Asia and in South Asia. So at least that's concrete. Now, you've heard about ADC works on vaccine confidence. What does that mean? It means that it means that technology is not enough. We can have the best vaccines and the best drugs, but if people don't take them, they will not work by definition. So there is, in many countries, more and more suspicion about the state, about science, about the supreme. And when someone like Trump is elected, then you see that it can become very dangerous for the world. Because they also don't believe in vaccines and in science. So we need to think and to not only develop technological solutions, but also listen to people and have understand them. So that's why social sciences are as important. Well, just to finish, are we ready for the epidemic? I think we're better prepared than before. We can, first of all, we have far much better and faster ways of diagnosing. We have also better institutions. There was no World Health Organization, even if I'm very critical that it existed. There are agreements and so on. We also, I think is very important, is that epidemic preparedness is now at the top of the agenda. Last year, when there was the G7 summit here in Japan, that was one of the on the agenda was epidemic preparedness, and there are some funds, and so because if something is not on the political agenda, it's there. Also, I think that mathematical modeling and artificial intelligence, machine learning, will be able to help us to be better prepared with finer information. And but the big test will be if we have this Spanish influenza, and we need to be prepared for that. And in the UK, there are, I think there are regular rehearsals in the hospitals and so on. Now, I'd like to end this with something else, and that is that we're facing now with new epidemics of a new type. And these are epidemics that are not caused by microbes, but they're of, I don't like the term non-communicable diseases because it's not correct. Some of these are caused by viruses. Let's say cervical cancer is a cancer, it's caused by human papillomavirus. Liver cancer, hepatitis viruses, and so on. And also we know from social science research that certain things are contagious. Behaviors are contagious. Be it drinking, drugs, obesity, these are contagious sexual behavior. What we are now confronted with is unprecedented in health history, and we need to see what we can do with it. And this is normally a slide that moves, where you see from 75 how obesity spreads, but I'm not sure how to do this. And at the moment, for example, women in South Africa have the same level of obesity as women in the US. So it's no longer limited to Western countries, high-income countries. It is going on elsewhere. But I'm sorry, I failed to. It must be what a double click here. Okay. Anyway, and that is far more complex to deal with. So we see, and that's why at our school, for example, we work more and more on cardiovascular disease, on diabetes, obesity, mental health, a chronic issue that kills slowly, in most cases. So, that's no longer, you cannot fix that with a vaccine or with a pill. You need also far more disciplines and societal interventions. And that is going to be the big challenge, I think, for when you work in public health and in global health and in medicine in general. Now, 3 years ago, when I became 65, I went with my wife to Congo, to DRC, to see how things were going where I had worked in 76, and I've been back a few times, the last time in 86. And the hospital was still there. I saw someone who became a friend, Sukato, who is a survivor of Ebola. He was one of the few nurses who survived. He works now, he's head of the laboratory. But what was depressing is that none of the promises that were made, that this hospital would be helped, that the surveillance system would be, etc., etc. I mean, you can make the list yourself. Nothing had happened. This is the lab. This is the centrifuge by hand. These are the reagents, and he has a microscope. That's it. So I always thought, this is a scam. We owe it to the 11,000 people who died in this epidemic that next time we will do a better job. So we need to continue to keep that alive and make sure that in every country we have good, surveillance and good, we support the poorest so that they will not be the victim of epidemics and can be prevented. This is again commercial, but the other book is Age Between Science and Politics. That's where you saw that it's not enough to have science, but you also need politics. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Piot, for this very wonderful presentation. Now we're going to open the floor to the audience. If you have any questions in relation to the Professor just about, please feel free to raise your hands and ask a question.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. It's very excellent. And I come from Taiwan, and Do you remember SARS outbreak in Taiwan in 2003? So the whole Taiwanese people are so panicked when SARS was outbreak. So I just want to ask, when the infectious disease like SARS, MERS, or Ebola is outbreak in one country, how should we just to communicate the correct information to normal people? And then the second question is like, do you think the vaccine is the only solution to prevent infectious disease like SARS, MERS, or Ebola? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the question is really important, and the word is communication, because how to communicate. The first thing is to communicate, because often there is no communication. And we saw it now recently in London. British Airways has a complete breakdown to the computer system, and the biggest complaint is that there's no communication. I try to look, they say you go to the website of British Airways, and the website says, sorry, we are out of business. But no, but you know, I think it's important to give correct information, factual information. Because people today, they go on the social media and they don't necessarily have the correct information. So making sure there is a very active communication. The problem is to find the best balance between alerting people that the situation can be serious, and on the other hand, not creating panic. So when we had Ebola, and in the UK, I became famous or whatever, but I said on TV, I said, I would not mind sitting next to someone with Ebola in the underground, in the tube, so the underground system. And that was all everybody, and that had a big impact. And why? And I mean it, if someone has Ebola but is not yet sick, and is not yet vomiting, I've done it. I mean, I sit next to the person, and you know, because you don't know, it's not dangerous. But so you need also people who can communicate effectively, but also listen. And I think secondly is you need to monitor constantly social media. Constantly monitoring and then see, because crazy theories will come up, usually some conspiracy theory and all that. I'm sure that happened, it happens in every country, and what to do. But the key is to have good communication. I think the lesson was when you take China with SARS, in the beginning it was no communication, and it was suppressed. And then the Minister of Health was fired, and it was the government decided, Madame Bourgi, who was she became state councillor, you know, and she took things in hand, and suddenly it was open communication. And it is a natural experiment to see when there was no communication, the social media, full of what's going on. That made it. But actually, Heidi, my wife is a specialist in that, and so. But I think we can do better. And the mistake we made often is that we only bring in professional communicators when we're in trouble. You need to bring them in from the beginning. I think so. No vaccine. No, vaccine is not the only thing. You know, Ebola can be contained without a vaccine. I think for HIV, because it's sexually transmitted, I think you're not going to go and stop having sex. So I think that will require a vaccine. But so I think that you need a multi-sectoral response, but hospitals can be very dangerous places. So I think for Japan, I'm not so concerned about big epidemic, except for influenza and so on, but all this, it's like in Korea, someone with MERS is admitted to intensive care unit. And there you get an explosion. And then people go to another hospital, another epidemic. And so that means that a very strict hospital hygiene and so on is very, very important. But you can't prevent anything in the absolute way. Zero risk doesn't exist. So. So someone else? Yes, get there. Okay. Yes, please. Go ahead. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your presentation is very inspiring. And I have 3 questions. Sorry. And first question is, the virus variation is due to the climate change you just mentioned, the many factors. So my question is, in the old days, we still live the way we are, and we don't have so many diseases. So is there any inspiration from what we used to be? Do we, if we live the day we used to be, is there any possibility that we can cut down the spread of infectious diseases? Is there any kind of inspiration? Because in China, we have some kind of epidemic of avian influenza. And in my province, the government advised that the people abandon raising their chickens at their backyards. And instead, the chickens should be raised in a farm, very collective way. So this is kind of abandon their old lifestyle. I'm not sure if it's a right policy to control this. So my question is, can you give us some advice about controlling infectious disease?
Yeah, let me start that one. I think that in the specific case of influenza and now H7 and 9 and all that and all these different influenza viruses, it's very clear that the poultry, the chickens and so on are a major reservoir. And it's not only in the farm or in the small farms, but also the market. So I think the answer is that probably there needs to be a change. But as I said, it can also amplify. If you bring then 1 million chickens in one farm, what is worse, to have let's say 1,000 farms of 1,000 chickens, or one farm of 1 million chickens? I don't know the answer. I think that's the kind of modeling we have to do and to think through together. And also, what do people accept? Because people still want to have fresh chicken in China. So they want, but not only in China. I mean, I've seen in Cambodia, in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, the Philippines. I mean, it's not just China, and that is going to be very difficult to influence. But that, I think, is the kind of research that has to be done also, and then find the best solutions. So, second question.
Thank you very much. And the second question is, you just mentioned that transportation is very important in the diseases spread. So, we can identify the persons who may have taken the virus. Such like if you enter a country, if I enter Japan, so I have to test the temperature first.
Yeah.
Yes, every country did that.
Yeah.
Yes, but the follow-up I think is very poor. If people come to the country from African countries, yes, after testing the temperature, well, nothing will be done. If the temperature is good, so they will think the person is healthy. In fact, it may not.
No, well, I think the evidence is pretty clear. It doesn't work. I mean, there's good experience or good documentation in Canada. Did that during the SARS outbreak, because there was somebody who traveled from Hong Kong to Toronto, and there was quite a big outbreak. And they screened everybody. It was, I think, don't quote me on the numbers, but it was, let's say, they screened a few million people who came into the country, maybe million, and they didn't detect anybody really, didn't stop anything, and it cost millions and millions. Now, and in the UK also, I can tell you that we advised the government not to have this kind of policy at entry, airports and so on, and yet the government established it. And I think this is a more of a political act, so that people feel something is being done, and the perception. But it's, I would say, it's pretty useless in general. But what is important is that you have, for example, that every single general practitioner in hospital, that they should always ask the question to any patient, where have you been recently? Because that is can be an indication, and that could be that can avoid also deaths by malaria and something. You know, and when someone with malaria comes in Japan, I'm sure, and in UK also, most doctors have no clue. But if they would know that that person comes from a malaria endemic area, it would be. So anyway, that's the difference between the politics and the how to say scientific evidence. That's the question.
Thank you. And just as one said about when the SARS broke out, if the government tells the public about the real fact, it may cause panic.
Yes.
So nowadays seems like it's better, much better. But when facing a strange virus, the public will still get panic. So it's very important to increase the public's health literacy. And about the infectious disease literacy, and they are very curious at first, but they are very easy to amplify the bad effects. So how to increase their health literacy in a proper way.
Yeah, but there are good examples also, like during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. In the UK, there was a lot of reporting, but it was quite measured, rational, and yet the UK newspapers are really bad. Most of them are very sensation, sex, the celebrities, so they go for the sensational issue. But in this case, they did what? In the US, for the two cases, it was like, I can't remember, it was in Texas, Houston or Dallas or whatever. There was one patient admitted to the hospital. It was 24-hour coverage, all the cameras on that hospital and all the time. So there was a kind of an epidemic of hysteria in the whole country. So I don't know enough about it, how it went. I think health literacy is very important, but it's I think the media are very important, but then the social media, that's the new element. You can talk with the newspapers, with the TV and so on, but you can't control Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff, And how to do that, I think is the right question. I'm not the best person to answer, but my advice and my approach is always, from when we have the problem, we bring in people who know about risk communication and communication, and from the beginning, not when, as I said, we're exploring. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. My name is Said Idris and I am Syrian. I'm finishing my PhD here in Piot. My question is, how, as you may know, that the United Nations and all the international organizations are not doing well in the Middle East. They are not doing, especially in the Syrian crisis, they are not doing well at all. How to get them more involved in taking care of Syrian people's health, inside and outside Syria, especially for refugees and displaced people inside Syria? In your opinion, as a specialist, as an expert?
To be honest, I really don't. I agree on your first part of your, that they don't seem to be doing a good job.
Yes.
And I don't know how you do that in a case of war, etc. That's not experience. But when I see that humanitarian organizations can do it, in our school we established 2 years ago, and partly because of the crisis and the civil war in Syria, the Center for Health and Humanitarian Crisis. And they're working in documenting issues, trying to design better solutions. The issue is that, of course, let's not forget, in Syria also, hospitals from MSF were bombarded by whoever. I think by several of the camps, etc. So, how do you handle that? I think you probably know
Yeah, I maybe
much
I
better
know
what should be done than I don't know.
Mm.
But I think
I have some ideas.
speaking up about it is very important.
I have some ideas actually.
It
And
was
I will
a-
work on them once
Yeah.
I finish my PhD.
I can also say that there was Joanne Liu from the president of MSF. She spoke in the UN Security Council, and they had a resolution, and that said that medical facilities should not be targeted by any party
Yeah,
and so, and the impact of that has been zero.
There, exactly there.
That's not the fault of the United Nations, but because they don't have. But who can do that? So that is, I think you're absolutely right. I honestly don't know what to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Due to limited time, would you kindly ask best one question very briefly?
Okay, please go ahead. In Sudan. Yes.
Thank you, sir, for the presentation. What do you think the role of the community, how to empower the community to face the epidemics?
Yeah, there is a very good, best example I think in community rights from in HIV, where we would not even dream of setting up programs on HIV without involving community, talking to people, listening, what are there, because then you can have better programs. And people are committed. I think there are other good examples that at our school we work quite a lot on mental health, but also in community type of approaches. During the Ebola outbreak in West Africa also, there were big incidents, even people were killed, hospital Red Cross volunteers and journalists and so on by the community. So in some communities they they were involved, and in others it was the government against the community. So I mean, you saw that one of the recommendations out of the panel was you need to work with community. And again, it's the same thing as for communication. You don't start to talk to the people in the community and to ask their advice when you're in deep trouble. You start from the beginning. And there is an interesting book written by an anthropologist whose name I've forgotten, Richards or something?
Paul Richards.
Paul Richards. And it's called I think, The People Science of Ebola. And I think he exaggerates a little bit, but he says that certain communities have understood the the basic transmission. They did everything that I did also when I was a young man. They learned it by themselves, and then the community came together and said they isolated people, and they did. And there are good examples there. And I think today everything that is digital communication can be turned into something very positive, but can also be very negative. And so I'm an optimist, so I always think, we have to use it in a positive way. But there were many conspiracy theories also, and then when they contaminate a community, it's very hard to go against them. But so I think is really key. I think for chronic diseases will be very important, and it's the norms in the community. What are acceptable norms? What is cool? So, example, today, smoking in many communities, like in Europe or in the US or among young people, is absolutely out, is not cool at all. When I was growing up as a teenager, that was the cool thing to do, was to smoke. And so there's been a change in what is acceptable or in norms, and the peer pressure changes. But I think we need to think here, depending on where you are, what one can also, the social media and so on and help. And we need to use far more, I think, as a medical community, as a health community, public health. We need to get into the 21st century with and use the tools that people use now. Even in Sierra Leone, you can see one of the poorest countries in the world, in Liberia. Everybody has a mobile phone. A mobile phone penetration is, Sudan the same, no? And even smartphones and all these kind of things. And but we have not yet for our kind of work, we've not exploited that in the other. Yes, please. That's it.
Maybe we go to the last question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Also, you said that I should have seen all slides before, but every slide was fresh. Does that mean I'm getting forgettable because of the aging? But my question is very similar about the global health. So we have been familiar with the word international health for a long time, for whatever the case. But suddenly, in the 21st century, the way it seems to replace with the word of global health. But then, my question, it becomes very dynamic. So, in terms of, for example, the pharmaceutical become very innovative. So, to get more finance for the field, which used to be the market field. So I think this dynamic change is caused, to my impression is real issue of change the landscape of workers. So I think you have contributed a lot of this kind of change. So could you review that change?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think this is a very important observation. But the term global health did not exist last century, so it's maybe 18 years old or so, that's all. And it was actually driven by the response to AIDS, and which brought different sectors together. But today, I think global health is really on many agendas, very interestingly. To start with the politics. It is on the top of the G8, G7, and Japan played a big role. When you speak with some Japanese ambassador now, or the prime minister even, they know about global health. Before they didn't know anything about epidemics and all that. And it is, there is now an awareness that this is part of the threats in society, for stability of society, but also is an instrument for soft diplomacy. For influence. So, and I think that's why Japan is playing such a big role in global health, is becoming really a big champion, and with the Prime Distinction is really in there. But I think it's not just him, if someone else would be the same. Because a country like Japan is vulnerable to epidemic threats, but also has a lot to offer. In terms of know-how. That's why, for example, the GHIT was created, Global Health Innovative Technology Fund, which brings together now, I think there's now 10 Japanese pharmaceutical companies, the government, the Ministry of Health, Labour, Welfare, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust. I'm the vice chair of the board. And it capitalized on Japanese know-how, basic science and pharmaceutical knowledge to develop products where there's no market incentive for neglected tropical diseases and so on, vaccines, drugs. It's quite successful. I mentioned the role of Japan in this CEPI coalition for new vaccines. So that's all on that front. So it's become a political issue. The UN and so on, the World Bank and all that. And I think that secondly, it is also reflects that our world is so connected. You may think that in Kyoto, okay, you are protected from anything else that's going on. No, I don't think that's the case. So this awareness of that globalization is not only globalization of markets, of profits, of goods, but also of health, and because it's about people, I think is an important discipline. And when you look at the American universities, nearly every single American university has an Institute of Global Health or a Department of Global Health. They were all established in the last 15 years, probably. Some very successfully, others not. I think Bill Gates has played a big role in this. by promoting the idea, by giving a lot of money. But I think it's going deeper now. And it's also very popular with students, medical students, with other students, they undergraduates. It's a very popular course in most universities in the UK, in Europe, in the US, and so on. I don't know about here. So I think it's maybe partly also young people feel very connected to others and people they've never met in the world, in their life, and they never meet, but they're on Facebook together or whatever. It's very interesting also, this phenomenon. So I think it is, it's not a discipline in such its own right, but what I find intellectually very stimulating is that many different disciplines come together. And so my background is microbiology, laboratory, infectious diseases is very different from other, but social sciences have a lot to bring. I'm very excited about the mathematics coming in there, the modeling and all that. And now I hope that we can embrace more innovation. Innovation, not only technology like pharmaceutical technology, but also digital innovation. I think will help a lot. And that's, for me, the next frontier, where we combine the biological, physical sciences, the methodologies from mathematics and statistics, the social sciences, and the digital innovation. And that will not, global health is not only about far away, but is also here. It will benefit. We already start seeing what's called reverse innovation, things that were developed maybe in Africa or in India, and that we benefit from in Asian countries. The time is gone that it's one-way street. That everything we know is in Europe, North America, and Japan, and then other countries. That's where the problems are, and we're going to solve that now. It's coming a circle. So it's very exciting times for that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I'm very good to today. So thank you very much, Peter. It's a really inspiring, lecture. So for all of the participants today. So would you please join me again to give a big hand to Dr.